So, Georgia, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. As you know, we do these video interviews with key leaders around the county that we use as pre-work for our leadership immersion programs. We're going to have a discussion today about the nonprofit sector, and I thought you could just take a couple minutes and introduce yourself first.
Sure, it's great to be here. As always, thank you, Kaarin, and thank you, Leadership Council San Mateo County. My name is Georgia Farooq. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Thrive, the Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County. And I am a founding board member of Leadership Council San Mateo County, also very proud of that, and have been with Thrive for almost 10 years and happy to share and answer any questions.
Well, under your leadership at Thrive, it's grown quite a bit. It's really sort of expanded its support of nonprofits, and you've seen a lot of change over those 10 years. So, from your viewpoint as the CEO of Thrive, how would you describe the state of the nonprofit sector in San Mateo County, and sort of what feels fragile right now, but also what feels resilient right now?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a lot to cover today. It is an extraordinarily challenging moment. And even though over these 10 years we've seen a lot of different challenges, this feels different. But I wanted to start with, I think, not just what feels resilient, but what is sort of ever true about the sector. And I think right now I'm particularly proud because I think the sector is really nonprofits locally and across the entire country are really serving as a moral compass, I think, in this moment. And I think we see that, we can feel that. I think without even getting really super specific about it, you understand what I'm saying there. And I think the other thing is that nonprofits are still seen as trusted messengers here hyper locally. They were during COVID, and they're seen as trusted messengers now. And I think feels hopeful and powerful. And I think those of us that work in the sector really value that we have in waves, not always 100%, but that we have the trust of the community. That's a huge asset and something that we're really proud of. In terms of what is fragile, there's so much I think that's fragile right now. I think Thrive just completed a report with Silicon Valley Council of Nonprofits, a refresh of our 2023 landscape report, and some really interesting things. We're going to be publishing that report soon. But demand for services has continued to just skyrocket, and the funding has not kept up. ARPA funding obviously has run out, and a lot of nonprofits have already experienced federal cuts, and others are anticipating cuts from, all of the federal funding that has been cut as well. So I think nonprofits were already constrained before, and were being asked to do more with less. And then that's just continuing right now. There's so many examples of that. Um,
Yeah. You talk about the trust in the community at a time when I think there's hesitation to maybe seek government services that a lot of people are entitled to. They're turning more and more to nonprofits as a trusted source. So that is, yeah, I agree with you.
but
That
we
would be
did
structure.
see, unfortunately, in the survey, there was evidence. The 160 nonprofits that responded this time, we focused just on chief executives and those that were in charge of budget,
Mm.
since this was there was a big financial component to this particular survey. But in terms of one of the most disruptive things right now, and this was the survey was filled out a few months ago. Even then, it was ICE activity,
Mm.
huge disruption for nonprofits. And then on the point that you were just making, even though we do have the trust of the community, the environment right now is having a chilling effect on access to services. You'll probably hear that from HSA as well. But the nonprofits, the 160 nonprofits that responded, a large percentage of them had seen the impacts of the general environment on accessing services, which is, again, a huge concern of ours right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you kind of touched on some of them, but when you look at the challenges that are ahead, What do you think are some of the key challenges? As you've mentioned the report from 2 years ago was just a fantastic snapshot of sort of what nonprofits are looking for, workforce needs, et cetera. What do you think are going to be some of the challenges that you see in the report that are going to be coming up for nonprofits?
So number one, the funding headwinds, just that's big. And it's again what I mentioned, there's already been impact, and then it's the anticipated impact of continued cuts. So that's a top line change that nonprofits have already reported. Another one is just overall weaker fiscal footing, and fewer than 1 in 10 nonprofits report improved net revenue over the last fiscal year. More than 4 in 10 report declines, and these patterns actually are consistent across funding models. So there's sort of a macro thing that we see that is happening. Um, Another thing that we found in the report, sort of a top line finding, was operational pressure from executive actions that are just reshaping day-to-day operations, all the effort that you have to put into safety planning, messaging, program design. And you're doing this with and without federal dollars, right? And again, I said this and I just have to say it again, ICE activity really generated highest rates of significant direct impact. And then we have workforce stress and capacity limits. This was a theme before, so
Yeah,
this is compounded now, right? Burnout, below market pay, hiring challenges are widespread. So even where organizations are expanding services, capacity gains are not keeping pace. This feels to me like a just, it's unfortunate that we have to focus on these darker spots, but it's important to communicate this information, I think. There's so much that's wonderful that's happening in the sector, and I don't want to obscure that, but I think in the short time that we have to, it's kind of my duty to relay what the nonprofit executive directors were saying. Again, I think you and I get to experience a lot of the joy that
mm,
nonprofits provide, and even that employees experience. And I think that is still there. It's just that these realities are starting to compound and make operating a nonprofit a lot more difficult, even in our really wealthy county.
yeah. Yeah, the role of a nonprofit leader has changed a lot too in the last 10 years. And what would you say is sort of the biggest change for those leaders?
I would say it's actually scope creep. Uh,
Mm,
and we used to just be like, no, 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 creep is terrible. And it is kind of terrible, but it's necessary now in a lot of ways. And so that's the
mm,
biggest change that I've seen. But that's also been a bonding thing for the sector, I think, and it's been a commonality. But now it used to be like, okay, you just focus on this. This is your mission, and you're just going to focus on this. Well, now everyone has to focus on, like every nonprofit, even arts organizations are thinking about response to the community in some way, emergency services planning for disasters. As you know, Thrive has
mm,
a disaster arm. So, actually, natural disasters, how do we plan for those? And how do we plan for these man-made disasters? So, suddenly, we are in a constant state of crisis. We are in this constant state of emergency. And so, emergency response is now part of everybody's job description. I'd say very few
yeah,
nonprofits have been untouched by that. And now, so there's yeah, broadly emergency response, I think, whether
mm,
it's on the man-made side or preparing for these natural disasters because of climate change and the realities that have impacted our local communities as well. It's
yeah,
something that I think we touched on more a couple of years ago when we talked about, the the flooding from I think 2021 and some other kind of local emergencies. And I don't think those things are going to go away. I think we have, again, a lot of organizing and coalition building that is going towards preparing for those kinds of disasters too. So all nonprofits are at the table.
yeah,
When we're operating our COAD, Thrive Rise, Resilience and Shared Emergencies, all kinds of nonprofits, ones that probably when the founders, developed their mission statements, they weren't thinking that these nonprofits were going to be having these kinds of conversations, and they didn't think they were going to be part of these kinds of coalitions. So scope
yeah.
creep, but it isn't funded necessarily, and that's the other thing. And I think it's just unavoidable now.
Yeah, so you mentioned that I think the last time we talked, the co-ed had just kicked off. So we did a similar interview 2 years ago, and the co-ed had just kicked off, and we'd had the flooding. So it was sort of a perfect storm, no pun intended. But so tell you just touched on the co-ed, but tell us a little bit more about the role it's playing in the county and how that sort of fits into the county infrastructure.
Yeah, of course, really grateful to the Silicon Valley Community Foundation who made the co-ed possible, and then also to both the healthcare districts. I just wanted to share that Peninsula Healthcare District and Sequoia Healthcare District, who have enabled us to launch the issue area committees.
Mm.
And there are four that we're focusing on right now, and they are co-chaired by executives of local nonprofits. So we have older adults and functional needs, which is co-chaired by Peninsula Family Service, and uh, blanking right now, uh, Ariba South Coast. And we have our children and child care, which is the committee chairs are from the YMCA and also from FLY, and those are both youth serving organization.
Mm.
And we have one that's focused on mental health and spiritual wellness, co-chaired by Alcove and also NAMI and our local NAMI chapter. And whenever I can always remember three things and not the fourth.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, and I have to say I'm sort of surprising you with questions, so I appreciate the jumping in too.
No problem. And then the other group is, oh, really important and actually something that, speaking of scope creep, all
Mm.
organizations touch on it these days, it seems, is food security. And so that is co-chaired by CoSide Hope and actually Moonstar Charitable Foundation as well. They have been very creative in the way that they've utilized their organization to distribute food to seniors, and their founder, Daisy, also Leadership Council alum,
Yep.
and she's just really action oriented as well, and is really interested in like, you know, activation, what happens in the event of a disaster, how do we activate, how do we coordinate. So all of these organizations are meeting, and there are committees that have formed to help really create that backbone. The other important piece is that we're coordinating very closely with Department of Emergency Management,
Mm.
and so that they are looking now, we're at the communication side of it, like how do we
Yeah.
communicate in the event of a disaster? So they're looking at more of the geographic locations and kind of coordinating with these other clusters that we're working on. So that's a little
Yeah.
bit on the emergency preparedness side.
It's fantastic.
Again, we're talking about nonprofits today, but nonprofits I think when the floods happened, it was local nonprofit organizations that were contacting us about residents who were not being helped, whether it was in uh, uh, certain parts of the county that were harder to access. And so we were able to provide that support and liaison. So,
Yeah. That's great. Thanks for touching on that. I think it's such an important part of what Thrive does, but also the infrastructure in the county to help our more vulnerable population. So thanks for touching on that. What do you think is most misunderstood about the nonprofit sector and how it works at the local level?
I think nonprofits are just treated differently,
Mm.
and I always think of this story that founder of a really wonderful organization here locally shared with me, which is when she went to the county to meet with some county because they were doing work regionally, and she, as a nonprofit, she was sort of given a certain kind of treatment, I guess, in terms of, I think, maybe not being treated as a business, and also I think not being treated as an equal partner. And I think
Mhm.
we do see that with, sometimes that happens. And then she spun off a for-profit arm, and then she was meeting with government officials in her for-profit capacity, and as the same individual with the same back, everything
Mm,
about her was the same, but had a very different interaction with government. So just share that because there are a lot of biases that come into play when folks are thinking about nonprofits. They might think that nonprofits are not being run efficiently. And I think right now, I mean, we can touch on this a little bit later, but there's just this perception, instead of understanding that nonprofits are like everything is sort of thrown at them without the appropriate resources. I think there's a lack of understanding around that sometimes. And
mm,
that, they are equal partners. They are, in my opinion, they're more values driven, and they actually, one of the things that is really challenging for me right now is how many strategic planning processes have you been through with organizations and with maybe even other, and it's amazing that we spend so much time on values, yet it seems like there's this crisis happening at a broader level where people aren't even like, what was the point of working on those values? So I think people don't understand that nonprofits are really values driven, and that I don't think they fully understand that as well. And I think that's just a bright spot right now. The other part that they don't understand, and again, I hate to sound like, we've got this like list of pet peeves. It's
no, no, yeah,
but
no. It's the nature of the
you
question.
know,
So,
I think another thing is like it's just a no-brainer. Invest in staff and people. You need to. And somehow, I think, especially maybe, really wonderful, well-meaning boards of organizations that were like really primarily volunteer-driven organizations, sometimes it's very hard for them to make that transition to we need to invest in staff and you need to
yeah,
pay people to be able to provide these services. I think it's difficult sometimes because, and it's understandable. It's sort of, when people think about tax dollars, there are a lot of, I think, and just charitable giving. There are a lot of sensitivities, right? But
yeah.
at the end of the day, nonprofits are businesses. You need to invest in people.
Yeah, and it's been shown to that investment reduces turnover, keeps people, the level of burnout in the nonprofit industry is quite high, because of the hours worked and because of the type of work that they're doing. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more that investment in organizations and the assumption that maybe that nonprofits don't need it and that they can do without it. So yeah, thanks for talking about that. As you know, as you've been talking about, the nonprofits are being asked to do more with less. What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? So, what is, sort of the day-to-day operations of a nonprofit? What is that looking like now when you are constantly stretched?
I think, we've had an issue with burnout for a long time, and so I think that's continuing. But I think this might be leading into another question, but I think nonprofits are actually focusing on solutions right now, and so even in our survey, what we were finding and is that they're focusing on adaptation more. And so I do think that there's this like interest in innovation, adaptation, and collaboration is rising. We've got data on that. That's really interesting. I think equity work, at least in our region, is still at the front line. And I think that's really wonderful to see that so many organizations are not abandoning their ready work as well. And I think, again, being really values driven, not having it be a convenient thing. Like, okay, DIB was the thing of the moment a couple years ago, and now we're shifting. No, actually, there was a really big values component to why we were doing this work, and I think a lot of organizations, not everyone, and organizations have different, I think, risk tolerances as well right now in this moment. But I think it's just been great to see that that's part of the response as well. So in terms of the adaptation, kind of restructuring fundraising and diversifying fundraising, restructuring programs. We've seen like, instead of like that big round of layoffs that might be happening at the corporate level, right? We're seeing more delaying hires and things like that, kind of a wait and see approach that's happening. Um, Drawing on reserves, updating legal communications protocols to stay
Mm.
responsive as well. So those are some of the things that we've seen in terms of the response.
Are you seeing a difference between how smaller organizations are making these changes and larger organizations? Do you see any sort of fundamental difference there in terms of their challenges?
I think, what we're seeing is that larger nonprofits have the, they're more likely to have the expertise in-house. And I think the smaller organizations are relying more on coalitions and group trainings and things like that. And we see a lot of small organizations accessing our services, whether they're, maybe it's a legal training. So for sure, I think there's just more propensity to be in coalition, I think,
Mm.
for the smaller organizations for sure.
Yeah. When we talk about funding, which has obviously come up several times, there's a lot of competition for the funding that's out there. What do you think funders and partners might be missing when they assess nonprofit effectiveness? And what questions should they be asking when they're trying to figure out who to fund and who to invest in?
So I think on the positive side, I think there has been a movement towards trust-based philanthropy here locally and multi-year funding and providing general operating support. Not the complete change we would have liked to see, but we've been talking about this for a long time, the importance of general operating funds, and also that trust-based philanthropy piece. Unfortunately, even with, and I have to say this like with kind of a broken heart because I'm seeing that, okay, I expected it from government, but I'm seeing it in philanthropy too. We've had, locally some challenges, as you know, with some really high profile nonprofits having some challenges, um, closing, all these things, really, really big events for our small community. And unfortunately, where when things like that happen, I think in corporate, folks just look at that one institution. They don't look at the entire sort of sector. And I think the reverberations for our sector have been really profound. We anticipated they would be, but I'm seeing it like even with those that are, in trust-based philanthropy, they've shifted like, hey, we're not going to really ask as much about financial need, just due diligence and accountability and financial strength. And so what I would ask, I think what they're missing is um, it's not just when you're looking at the organization's financial health, it's not just about, um, you know, due diligence uh, and providing proper oversight and all of that. It's also about, okay, they've been in crisis and response mode for several years now. Are you asking the question on, and the funders and partners don't understand that they may be part of the problem because they might not be funding at the appropriate rate. So when they're changing, like we've heard this directly from various people and the government, okay, now we're just gonna, provide that extra scrutiny. And
Mm.
I think what we ask them is make sure you're having the conversations with nonprofits. Make sure you're asking the questions, not just looking at the balance sheet, but like, why did this happen and how can we help? And is there some bridge funding we can provide? And is this really about um, organizational structure and capabilities, or is it about the fact that the needs skyrocketed and we asked, cost of living has increased and cost of providing services has increased, and we've kept, the the funds flat or they've declined and we're asking for more. So I think it's just that's a really big piece for me right now, that whole financial picture. It's not just an exercise of looking at their financial statements. It's have a conversation. Another
Yeah.
big piece is I think executive directors right now may be scared of asking for help. So the importance of peer groups is something that
Yeah.
we've been sharing with county staff and others. Like we have these executive peer coaching groups where, in a confidential environment with a skilled facilitator, executives can chat about their needs without their boards there, and they
Yeah.
can ask each other for help. And what we wonder is, are there enough opportunities for executives before it's too late to say, I need help? And it's a tough environment out there. I think a bunch of articles in December, just this past December, nationally just showed like Forbes, other just showed nonprofit, uh, just charitable giving is down. I think a lot of nonprofits really struggled with their annual appeals and just overall giving, has been really impacted. And so just looking at all of those factors instead of saying, why is this nonprofit not, um, why why does this, why are they struggling? Like ask
Yeah.
yourself some of the other questions.
Yeah, those peer circles and those peer opportunities are really important. It's something that we've implemented in our curriculum is setting up peer circles and a structure to that conversation so that people also get used to having those conversations. Because hearing from peers and sharing and getting that feedback we think is a really essential part of support for leaders. So yeah, that's a big piece. You mentioned in a couple different points already how nonprofits are working together. So they're seeking, their shared services, really trying to share resources as much as possible. What do you think is some of the greatest opportunities for nonprofits to work differently in our county, either by aligning efforts or reducing duplication? Sometimes those are tough conversations, but just wondering what you think some of the opportunities might be.
I think I was really excited to see in our report that the interest in shared services from last time we surveyed nonprofits increased markedly, like
Mm.
significantly. And so there's openness to, I think we're going to see a lot of interest in shared services and even mergers. And I think folks are having those conversations. And one of the articles I alluded to, um, I think it was the one in Forbes, talked about how nonprofits are at an inflection point in 2026,
Mm.
and that really they're not going to be looking at just doing business as usual or crisis response. That's been the kind of MO, and they're realizing it's not sustainable. So I think everybody's kind of over that. Like we can't just be in crisis mode all the time. So they're
Yeah.
thinking about redesign. And it's a great article. I mean, I think it's worth sharing maybe with the group. It's
Yeah,
something
we might include that in the pre-reads.
I
So
think the
thanks. Yeah.
CEO of Palo Alto Community Fund shared it with our board, and really, I think it touches. It's funny because we saw a lot of those things, and we've been saying a lot of those things based on the research that we conducted, and I think they articulate it really beautifully. So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation, redesign, and people are really open to that. Um, uh, the CEO of the San Francisco Foundation was at a Northern California Grantmakers event a few months back. And one of the things he said is like, hey, a lot of this, yes, there are challenges right now. And yes, it's a difficult time, but a lot of these systems have been broken for a lot of people for a long time. It's not just now that that's happening. And kind of that maybe a little bit of excitement around hey, it's time to redesign, rebuild, and let's see the hopefulness and the opportunity in this moment. It's not just about, okay, funding cuts and challenges with that. But there is an opportunity, I think, redesign as well. So I think that's maybe one hopeful point.
Yeah, that is exciting. We'll end on a leadership question. So what do you think, what kind of leadership is going to be required in this ecosystem, both sort of at the macro level across the industry, but also on, the individual level? Type of leadership do you think is going to be required to really support the future of the nonprofit sector in San Mateo County?
I think, we haven't talked about AI at all today, and it's
Mm.
something that we know is going to be part of this reshaping and redesigning. I think for me, I think about that discernment is huge right now. It's one of those things that how can, you're going to have a lot of, you know, knowledge out there and available and but how will you be able to discern in terms of what's needed for your community, and then I think experience is really probably very important at this moment in time. I think there's always room for I think there's we need new leadership, absolutely, and we've needed it for a long time. But I think working alongside, I think those that have lived experience that are in the community, I think is going to be critical. And I think that's where we'll find real leadership, right in the heart of the community. And I think, what Leadership Council does is you find ways and pathways to bring that leadership up, I think, which is really powerful. So um, I think there are a lot of other things, but I've been thinking a lot about that around that the importance of discernment right now, especially in the age of AI. That's something
Yeah.
that I think about.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. And then just one last question. We have, as you know, a good portion of our classes are nonprofit leaders, but then we also have a good portion of our classes not are not involved in nonprofits currently. Is there any, if somebody wants to get involved in supporting the nonprofit community, what any advice and, things that they can do that would be helpful in this particular moment?
Well, one really fun way is attending our onboard event,
Mm.
which happens in April. And Leadership Council is always a wonderful partner in that and bringing great prospective board members. And so, over 50 nonprofits get together, and there's so many more. We're getting notes from a lot right now, a lot of nonprofits that are seeking wonderful qualified board members. And there are, even if you haven't volunteered on a board before, there are just a lot of organizations that might need your particular perspective, your skill set, your passion,
Yeah.
your kindness. And I think there are just a lot of ways to get involved. And the nice thing about an event like Onboard is even if you're not ready to be a board member, it
Mm.
starts you on the path of having those conversations, getting to know those organizations, maybe volunteering in a different way for an organization, and then eventually potentially being a board member.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a great event because you also, as you mentioned, you get to see so many nonprofits in one space and really understand all the great work that's happening in our county as well. And regardless of what your passion is, you're always going to find an organization that's working in that space. So that's a great, in our community, we finding out more about On Board as it gets closer. So thanks for doing that. Okay, thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it. And we will actually be seeing you on the learning days.
Yes.
So thank you for joining us for lunch. And yeah, we look forward to having you. And thank you, as always, for all the great work that you do.
You're welcome, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.